Hey, it's Rock from Smoke Q. Let's look at how we do these griddle seared salmon bites with a blackened finish. To get started, I work to remove the skin from the underside of this salmon fillet. Now this process can be rather difficult at times, and I've done everything from filleting the entire thing with a knife, and I've even seen others online pour boiling water on the skin. But quite honestly, this technique I'm showing here is probably the easiest way to remove the entire salmon skin reasonably quickly. This technique takes some practice, and I even struggled here a bit to get that first incision, but with roughly 1 to 2 inches separated, I simply grab the skin and place my hand underneath, then in one motion I slide my hand lengthwise to separate the skin from the salmon meat. Now that I have the skin separated from the salmon meat, I start by slicing off the really thin edge to essentially square up the fillet before I begin to prepare it into chunks. Once I've done that, I begin by cutting the entire fillet into roughly 1 inch wide strips long ways all the way down the entire fillet. Once I have the entire thing sliced into strips, I then cut each of these sections into either 2 to 3 bite-sized chunks. Here I'm going for roughly 1 inch by 1 inch or 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch square cubes. I'm trying to do my best to make them as uniform as possible so that they all cook at roughly the same internal temperature. But I will say, my kids seem to like the smaller pieces, which I tend to think dry out a little bit quicker. While my wife and I, we like the larger, juicier chunks. So I'd say just use your judgment on how big of pieces you want to cut your chunks into. But keep in mind, they will shrink slightly when you cook. So, as I always say, err on the side of larger chunks over smaller ones. Once I get all the salmon bites cut into these chunks, I place them in a large bowl so that I can next turn to the seasoning. To begin, I drizzle on a good coating of extra virgin olive oil, and then I gently maneuver the salmon bites in the olive oil to coat all of them. Like I said, gently, because these cube bites can become brittle if they are overworked. With the olive oil coated, I then apply a layer of my Rock's Anytime seasoning and then my Rock's Big Easy seasoning, which is a blackening Cajun seasoning. These are my 2 favorite spices for salmon, but certainly grab for whatever your favorite is. If you want to keep the same flavor profile, I really like Killer Hog's AP, and for a Cajun style seasoning, you really can't go wrong with Meat Church's Holy Voodoo. And now that I have these seasoned, I again gently use my hands to incorporate the seasonings on all the salmon bites as evenly as possible. Lastly, as an optional step, I do place the seasoned salmon bites in the fridge while I get the griddle up to temp. For this cook, my main goal is to get a nice seared crust, so I start by cranking up my Traeger Flatrock to a high heat and then place a thin layer of fresh olive oil down and get it as hot as possible before I dump my chilled salmon bites directly on the smoking hot griddle surface. While I keep the griddle on high, I spread out all the salmon bites so that they are all touching the griddle surface and not on top of each other. That will allow them to get a nice sear on this high heat. I do this for about 1 to 2 minutes before turning the heat down and to more of a medium to medium high heat. Then I let them cook for another 3 to 4 minutes. And using my spatula, I then flip them over and sear them on the other side. You want to do your best to not over flip these salmon bites because they can become somewhat brittle if you spend a lot of time flipping them back and forth throughout this entire cook. As you'll see here, after getting a good chunk of them flipped, I do have to go in and individually flip some of them over to make sure that I get a good sear on both the top and bottom side of these salmon bites. Now, after I've flipped them and let them cook for another 2 to 3 minutes, these suckers are done and I'm ready to pull them off. Using my spatula, I gently place them onto a plate so that I can serve them. But I can't stress enough, delicacy is the best for handling these as they can become somewhat brittle with a lot of overhandling. In total, I've cooked these for somewhere between 6 to 10 minutes. It really just kind of depends on the size of salmon bites that you end up cutting into, and then also what is your desired doneness temperature. But overall, this is a relatively quick cook and it's a very easy thing to do on a weeknight. Now, after letting them rest for just a minute, I apply a thin layer of finishing salt. Here I use some smoked seasoned salt, but feel free to grab some simple sea salt, and really that's it. These are best served hot right off the griddle as they cool pretty fast, but I'm telling you, these are going to be one of your favorite things to put on the griddle for a quick meal or even an appetizer. One of my daughters asks for this literally on a weekly basis, so this one definitely stays in our rotation quite often. If you're still here, I can't thank you enough, but if you haven't already, please like and subscribe to stay up to date on all my backyard pitmaster adventures.